Nail Down. I'm Jason Gilbo, JGilbo11. With me is Spencer Limbach at Spencer_JL. Taking a look at pitching on tonight's DraftKings and FanDuel slates. And overall, I mean, it's not crazy appealing, but I mean, there are some guys in some good spots. But I think it's a night that we can probably sit in that mid-range and get some bats in.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying to you before the show, before we went on the air here, is that there's about 4 or 5 guys in the mid-range that you can make a case for tonight. And I think that's where I'm focusing more of my attention. Obviously, Max Scherzer is the only ace on the mound today, but it's really kind of hard justifying his price on the road against San Francisco. So we'll get into that a little bit more and some of these other guys that we like.
Yeah, definitely feel the same. And first one here, you got Baltimore and Toronto in the Rogers Center. Kevin Gausman versus Marco Estrada. And this one is kind of those ones where I wouldn't be surprised if both these guys had good starts, but I don't see them at their price tags really being relevant in the DFS world tonight. I think it's just more of a kind of a thing to talk about as far as hitters go.
Right, and that's exactly how I feel. And the key to that is, like you said, at their price points. I think they're just a little bit too expensive. If they were a little bit cheaper, I might take a flyer in the tournament on a guy like Gausman, just because the Blue Jays, as we know, just stacking them over the season, they haven't always come through in decent situations at home. And Gausman's kind of a hot and cold guy who does have strikeout upside. So like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if he does come through with a solid performance. But at the same time, there's a lot better guys that you can have more confidence in at the same price range. So Gausman's kind of a guy I like down the road a little bit more when the matchup is a little better, but not necessarily tonight against Toronto, just given that risk and given the other guys on a full slate like tonight that you can get for a similar price.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm kind of hesitant on that Jays. I mean, they're projected for nearly 5 runs with their total. I'm not buying it. And as you mentioned, they've been kind of on and off this year, especially at home. I mean, you kind of expect them to dominate, but that really hasn't been the case. And Estrada on the other side, I mean, I can't really get behind his price. I know Baltimore's been slumping right here out of the break, but still, I think I would prefer Gausman over Estrada if I was choosing.
Right.
So moving on to the next game here, you got the Yankees and Rays in Tropicana. Rays small favorites, -117. Odorizzi versus Ivan Nova. I don't mind Odorizzi. He's a GPP play for me on FanDuel. DraftKings, I don't mind him as a cash SP2 just because he is pretty cheap. And I feel out of that range of guys around the 8,200 mark, I feel most comfortable with him. He's really tough on left-handers, and that strikeout rate is high against lefties. I think it was near 28% this season. So it kind of adds to him being a decent play against this Yankees offense that is heavily left-handed.
Right, and you have to like him at home. He has been much better there this season and for his career in that pitcher-friendly park there at the Trop. So, I mean, that kind of feeds into the rationale as well. He does have a little bit of strikeout upside, like you said, and the Yankees have really fallen off the map in terms of offensive production. They rank now 26th overall in WOBA, which is really kind of fascinating just to think of. You wouldn't have expected that at the beginning of the season. It looked like a pretty solid lineup throughout. But, I mean, slumps, inconsistencies, underachieving, and some injuries here and there really kind of made this Yankee offense one to pick on for opposing pitchers. So I really like Odorizzi, maybe 7 innings, giving up 1 to 2 runs, strikeout per inning, and really a reasonable chance of getting the win there with Ivan Nova, a guy we kind of like to target left-handed hitters against. I think the Rays offense could get to him and provide a little bit of run support. So I like Odorizzi. GPPs for FanDuel where you can only pick one pitcher, but on sites like DraftKings or Yahoo, I kind of like him as an SP2 if you need a little bit of salary cap relief.
Yeah, definitely. And on the other side, I mean, as you mentioned, Nova, I do think the Rays offense could get to him. I mean, obviously, the Rays offense isn't the strongest. But given the fact that Nova's, I mean, $100 more than Odorizzi on DraftKings, and even that is cheap price tag on FanDuel, I don't feel the necessary need to dive down, even though this Rays offense obviously isn't great.
Yeah, and even though Nova has had a decent strikeout rate over the past 3 or 4 games, I don't really know where that came from. He hasn't been a strikeout pitcher throughout his whole career or this season, so I think that's a little bit more of an anomaly, and we can't really hold on to that carrying throughout.
Yeah, I definitely agree. A's and Indians here, Trevor Bauer versus Kendall Graveman. And Bauer here, I mean, is kind of, things are starting to kind of fall off for him. I mean, he had a nice stretch over the last few starts, not as great. The A's offense, I mean, obviously they're a bottom five WOBA team against right-handed pitching. They still don't strike out a ton. Um, I don't know. I'm not really in love with Bauer. I don't think there's really a ton of upside. I know he's fairly cheap. I mean, 8,300 on DraftKings isn't bad. Um, 85 on FanDuel. I'm just not a fan of Bauer, I guess, in tonight's matchup.
Right, and I think there's a lot of different ways you can go and feel a lot better in. Some of these pitchers we'll get to a little bit later. So I kind of feel the same way about Bauer. But just looking at these two pitchers, Graveman and Bauer, they're kind of trending in opposite directions. Bauer was pretty great, had a good stretch through May and June, falling down a little bit. This Oakland team doesn't strike out a ton, kind of a pesky offense that you don't really love to target against. And then on the other side, Graveman, he's been pretty good as of late, but that hasn't come with a ton of strikeout upside. It's come with more efficiency, him working deep into games. And I don't know if that would be the case against a Cleveland team that's just solid 1 through 9 and can give him trouble. So I think this is one of his tougher matchups in a while, and I really wouldn't expect him to, stay hot in a road matchup against a really good Cleveland lineup. So both of these guys are really kind of falling back behind some other pitchers in similar price range.
Yeah, definitely. And Graveman, I mean, he's a guy, as you mentioned. I mean, a couple, home starts, he's been solid in kind of plus matchups for him. On the road this year, he hasn't been that great, and the home runs have been a bit of an issue on the road, giving up 10 compared to 3 at home. Struggles a little bit with left-handers, and obviously against this heavy lefty Indians team. Yeah, I think Graveman's just kind of an easy stay away. Houston, Detroit, next one here. Matt Boyd versus Colin McHugh. And Houston obviously projected for pretty big runs tonight. They haven't been the greatest against lefties, but I don't think Matt Boyd's an arm where it's not worth the risk to me to kind of take a shot on in tournaments.
Right, and I don't know what to make of Matt Boyd at this point in time. I mean, he's had some really good starts. He's had some serviceable starts, and he's gotten beat up in a couple others. So it's really hard to gauge what's going to happen tonight. Obviously, Detroit, their ballpark there, Comerica Park, kind of middle of the road in terms of pitcher-friendly, hitter-friendly park factor. So maybe if a couple of Houston bats fit in your lineup pretty well, those right-handed hitters, you can take a chance on them. But, I mean, it's almost like a stay away from me. I'm not actively targeting anyone, but if someone fits into my lineup well, I might take a chance there. Looking on the other side, Colin McHugh is actually favored, a -130 money line favorite in this matchup. And as we know, Detroit, their offense, they either have it or they really don't. So for that reason, I kind of like McHugh as a tournament pick. Obviously on the road, this Detroit offense, if they are clicking, they have a ton of upside and could really get to McHugh. But, I mean, he's pitching really well as of late. And the key to him has always been if his slider's working, kind of like Michael Pineda of the Yankees there. And McHugh's slider has been working as of late. He's had that strikeout upside. And Detroit really, I mean, they're top 10 in strikeout percentage. So if you add it all up, there is some upside for McHugh. I would only pursue it in tournaments if the price is right, if you want to be different, because obviously there is risk on the road against a team that is capable of hitting 3+ home runs in a given game. So that's kind of the way I'm gauging it tonight.
Yeah, I definitely could see that. I mean, you look at this Tigers offense, as you stated, I mean, up and down this year. I mean, near a 22% strikeout rate against right-handers. And as you mentioned, McHugh, I mean, has been coming around. I mean, we've seen that strikeout upside, 6 against the Angels, a team that really doesn't strike out a ton, 10 against a good Seattle offense. And I don't mind him at that price tag, and I think he is going to be pretty low owned because I still think the Tigers really do hold such a name that keeps the ownership down. So I'm fine with McHugh in tournaments, but I think obviously, the floor is very low. Continuing on here, we got the Cardinals and Marlins, Mike Leake versus Jose Urena. And Mike Leake, I mean, coming off a bad start against the Dodgers. Before that, I mean, had 2 really solid starts against the Padres and Milwaukee. I'm not the biggest Mike Leake fan, just because there isn't really a ton of upside. Obviously, we saw it against the Padres and Brewers, but I think that was just given the fact that they have insanely high strikeout rates. But this matchup, I think, is a little tougher. I can't get behind Leake as really a guy that I enjoy rolling out there.
Right. I do have him listed as a tournament pick, and call me crazy if you have to. I really welcome the dissent if you do have one, if you are that hesitant on him, because I don't know how great I feel about it, but Mike Leake has been really good against right-handed hitters throughout his career. His problem is against left-handed power, where he gives up home runs, he gives up hits all over the place. And Miami right now, Bohr is on the disabled list. They really don't have anyone in that department. I mean, Christian Yelich is one of their more solid left-handed hitters, and he has some pretty bad career numbers against Mike Leake. So, I mean, take that for what you will. I think Leake could get through this lineup pretty decently. You're looking at a pitcher-friendly park there in Miami. And then on the other side of it, the Cardinals could give him some decent run support against a subpar pitcher in Jose Urena. So I think things are kind of adding up to Mike Leake in a pretty decent spot there. But, I mean, as we've seen time to time over the years, Mike Leake in a decent spot doesn't always mean Mike Leake will have great fantasy production. Kind of the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde act that he's pulled over the past 3 years and as fantasy owners have come to know him for. So there is a lot of tournament risk there, and there is a good chance that even though he's good against right-handed hitters, Stanton, Ozuna, those guys could get to him just on one pitch and hit a 3-run homer. So that's kind of the risk reward you're looking at. I mean, there is some rationale to be said for him tonight, and he will have a very low ownership rate. But I'm kind of keeping him on the back burner for tournaments if the price is right.
And is he more on FanDuel or DraftKings for you?
Looking maybe a little bit of both, maybe an SB2 tournament play on DraftKings, but I was looking at him more on FanDuel, 7,500 down there. A little bit cheaper than Colin McHugh and kind of in the same similar category as him, with higher upside, lower floor tournament play.
Yeah, and I think the one thing with DraftKings, I mean, the fact that you're getting negatives for hits, and as you mentioned, I mean, there isn't really a ton of power in this lineup for left-handers, but you get Gordon back, Yelich, Suzuki, Dietrich, and that back end. You could knock around a couple of hits. I mean, and to say that he has a decent outing could turn into just kind of an average one given the scoring on DraftKings.
Right.
And as far as Urena goes, I mean, you talked about the Cardinals possibly giving him some run support, and I do see that happening. And even though he's had a couple serviceable starts, the last two, it was against two poor opponents. Different story here.
Yep.
So moving on here, we got the Rockies and the Mets. Steven Matz versus Tyler Chatwood. Low-scoring game projected. Matz is a favorite here at home, -156. I like him quite a bit. He's a cash game guy for me, and I think spinning down off of Scherzer on FanDuel is where I'm looking. And obviously, I think there is some small risk just because, he did have that stretch where he wasn't good. He there were rumors of him being injured and kind of being off. I like his price more so on DraftKings at 8,500, but for me, I think he's playable in all formats against this Rockies team that awful on the road, bottom 3 in WOBA. Strikeout rate is high against lefties and on the road. So I think Matt's, it kind of all lines up for him for a decent start.
Yeah, and you basically said it. That's all the rationale that needs to go into it. Rockies are just a completely different team on the road. And I like Steven Matz too. He's my second favorite pitcher overall tonight. I really love the price point on Yahoo and DraftKings, as I wrote up in the Pitching Pulse article today. So that's especially where I want to target him. FanDuel, 9,700 is a little bit more expensive than I'd like to pay for him, and there is my highest rated pitcher of the night is a little bit cheaper than that, so I might stay away from him on FanDuel, but DraftKings, Yahoo, absolutely fire him up.
Yeah, definitely. And Tyler Chatwood on the other side, I mean, for me, I think he'll go out and have a fine start. I'm not quite sure I'm going to be firing away in my lineups with him. But it's just kind of those ones where I feel like I'm washing out Mets bats, just in addition to Chatwood as well.
Yeah, I mean, he does have a little bit of upside as he's shown over the season, but I mean, I just don't really love him. I mean, if you are going cheap, I think I'd rather pay a little bit extra for a guy like McHugh. and feel a little bit better doing that with the upside there than the Chatwood.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously he's been solid on the road, and did do well against this Mets team in cores. Yeah, I'm with you. I kind of rather spend elsewhere. Phillies and Braves here. You got Vincent Velasquez versus Tyrell Jenkins, and Velasquez I think is an intriguing GPP option. Not a guy I can quite trust in cash, but I do think there is some upside here against this Atlanta team. Velasquez, I mean, returned from the injury and did pretty well. Had a little bit of a downside against Pittsburgh, but overall, I still think that strikeout rate's up there, and he's worthy of a GPP look for me.
Right, and the emphasis there is on GPP. I feel this exact same way about him. He's been kind of up and down, and that Phillies offense doesn't exactly provide a ton of run support to put him in line for the win, especially on the road. So those are just a couple things to consider. Plus, Atlanta, their offense has kind of been waking up as of late. I don't really know what to make of that. They're still a bottom five offense in most major hitting categories overall. But, I mean, they're swinging a hot stick right now, Freddie Freeman especially. Adonis Garcia, he's riding a nice hot streak. So, I mean, maybe a little more hesitant with Velasquez against the Braves as we would have been, say, a month ago. And especially with a full 14-game slate, there are a lot of pitchers that you can feel more confident in for a similar price. Matt's being one of them, like we mentioned. So he is more of on the GPP back burner, but someone, I mean, who does have the upside, does have the strikeout rate to really kind of make good on a salary.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just because he's around other price guys, he'll probably get overlooked a little bit. And as you said, I mean, the Braves bats have been coming around, and we've been kind of burned by taking some pitchers against him of late. So I think it's going to keep his ownership down. I do wish the price was down a little bit more, but I still think that just kind of fuels into the fact that he will be a low-owned play.
Right.
And Jenkins on the other side, I'm not a big fan. I mean, there's no real upside even against the Phillies offense that obviously is bad, but Jenkins might be even worse.
Right. You can target a few hitters here and there against him, especially you can get some cheap bats there in the Philadelphia offense. One thing that I was going to mention is that Velasquez's last outing against Atlanta, I think he went 6 innings, 4 earned runs. So, I mean, that'll keep his ownership rate down too, given that he did not have success against this Braves offense earlier in the season. Obviously, he could bounce back, could have his way. Braves offense really isn't that good overall. So I wouldn't read into that too much, but just kind of something to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah, definitely. Royals and Rangers, Edison Volquez, AJ Griffin, 2 right-handers I'm never really a big fan of, and now you put him in this ballpark. It's just kind of a stay away. Not necessarily that I'm targeting this game as far as hitters go, I mean a ton, but it's just really kind of an unappealing matchup for both sides.
Right. It's kind of a mix and match from a hitting standpoint. I mean, you're not going to go out and just stack and call it a day. It's just kind of hitting, finding the right priced hitters. Jerkson Profar comes to mind on FanDuel if he's in the lineup. Guys like that you're really looking at targeting tonight. But high over-under in Texas this type of year, this time of year when the ball's just flying around the yard, I really don't think you can roster either of these guys.
No, definitely not. White Sox and Twins, Ricky Nolasco versus Jose Quintana. I like Quintana. Pitching against the Twins. It's for the 4th time this year. He's faced them 3 times already, 6 earned over 20 innings, 18 strikeouts, so nearly averaging a strikeout per inning against them, which is about right. I mean, you look at this Twins offense, pretty high strikeout rate, nearly 23% against Southpaws. Obviously, they do have a handful of right-handed bats that can get to Quintana, but I feel comfortable deploying them. I think one thing that I don't really like is the price tag, but I don't mind it on FanDuel at 9,100.
Right, and I think he's a pretty interesting tournament pick that can be utilized in cash games as well. I mean, you mentioned Quintana. This is his 4th time facing the Twins this season, and Minnesota has seen him quite a bit in the same division over the past few years, and they just can't figure this guy out. I mean, even though he is a left-handed pitcher and they have a couple lefty matchers in their lineup, he's pretty solid against right-handed hitters, and Brian Dozier doesn't have great splits against him. Miguel Sano, he's better against righties than lefties, and he's slumping right now. Eduardo Nunez has been traded. So, you look at that, and there's a lot of holes in this Minnesota lineup, and I think Quintana could just really cruise through it. and put up a pretty nice fantasy performance tonight. And he might be a little bit underrated because, I mean, Minnesota has been hotter on offense over the past month or so, and he's kind of one of those guys who's just slipping through the cracks. He doesn't have really a high money line. The Twins don't have necessarily a very low run total, but I can still envision him just pinning down this Minnesota offense and having a really successful night.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if he turns in and starts like he did, against them twice out of 3 times this year, I mean, that's solid production. And I think given the fact that we'll get to Scherzer in a little bit, we kind of draw the line where 10K is kind of where you're starting off and kind of trying to get some. If you are paying up, that's the range you might want to go with.
Yep.
And as far as Nolasco goes, I mean, I know the White Sox offense has been bad, but Nolasco, not a guy I'm looking to use here. Even though he's been a little bit better at home, still not a great right-hander.
Right, and it's just tough to have confidence in him. He has one of the worst splits against right-handers of any pitcher on the slate today. So that's where you're looking to target him. You can take Adam Eaton, left-handed guys as well. In fact, there's a lot of White Sox that have really good splits against him, and that I'm not a huge BVP guy, but I think that kind of carries a little bit of weight because they are, otherwise in a solid matchup against Nebraska tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I looked into that. I think they were, as a team, hitting over 300 against them, and obviously, I mean, Nolasco was tagged by them in the last start for 7 earned and 3 home runs. So there's that possible for that downside. And moving on to the next game here, we got the Pirates and Brewers. Junior Guerra versus Stephen Brault. Junior Guerra has been serviceable this year in this Pirates offense. I mean, we saw McCutchen have a nice night the other night, but overall, I think this game is just kind of unappealing for pitchers, especially given the fact that it's in Miller Park. I'm much more rather inclined to taking hitters rather than going with any pitcher here.
Right. It's tough to really find, the Pittsburgh hitters against Junior Guerra because you don't know if they're necessarily worth their price point. Maybe in tournaments, guys like McCutchen, Marte, and others. But Guerra has been a pretty decent pitcher this season. Really not looking to either side. I mean, maybe the park factor in Milwaukee helps out some of the hitters. And then Stephen Brault, he's a pretty serviceable lefty overall, had a decent outing against St. Louis in his first start. I don't really know what to make of him. This is the first time Milwaukee will see him. I mean, we even though he's a left-handed hitter, and the Milwaukee bats are pretty right-hand heavy, and there's a lot of power in that lineup. I really don't know what to make of it. I don't know if you can take Ryan Braun, Chris Carter, those guys in good faith, maybe mix them into a tournament. But overall, it's kind of a stay away all around in this game, which is kind of weird because it's in Miller Park and there's kind of a subpar pitcher going. But, yeah, that's kind of the way I'm looking at it.
I mean, let's say Milwaukee rolls out a lineup where they're missing Braun again, and some reason Lucroy's not in the lineup. I mean, we saw that yesterday. I mean, a lot of people didn't overlook it just because it was the early game, but that happened, and that was an awful lineup. And we saw Robbie Ray kind of cruise that, and obviously Robbie Ray a little more experienced. But at 4,100 on DraftKings, I mean, would that put him in play if they roll out just a truly awful lineup in GPPs?
Maybe. I mean, I really wouldn't hate it that DraftKings price is just astronomically low, and you can do a lot of things in tournaments with that type of cap space. So, I mean, I really don't hate it as an SB2. On FanDuel, 6,400, I don't think you can really go there. There's some other quality pitchers just a little bit pricier than that you can have a little more faith in with a more strikeout rate.
Yeah, definitely. Boston and Los Angeles here next. Red Sox are minus 156 favorites. Rick Porcello on the hill against Tim Lincecum. Tim Lincecum, and obviously a pretty easy fade here. But Porcello, I mean, interesting arm. I know he's been much better at Fenway, but obviously this is a nice ballpark. We saw that game last. I mean, that air really killed a lot of hard hit balls off of Weaver, and that could do the same here, just in case they do put balls in play against Porcello. I think he has a fine start tonight. I do think he kind of picks up a win, so I'm okay with Porcello in cash. Not really a big GPP guy though, just because I don't think there's a ton of upside.
Yeah, I do think Porcello is pretty safe tonight. I mean, we've been saying it all year. This Angels offense is very top heavy. You get around Calhoun, Trout, Pujols, and you can just really have your way with the rest of the lineup. So Porcello is one of those guys who certainly has the ability to do that. And now he's transferred from Fenway to pitcher-friendly Angel Stadium. So you really kind of like those external factors going in his favor. And then you just add the cherry on top that Boston could really get to Tim Lincecum tonight and blow him up and give him plenty of run support. So I really don't mind Porcello for the reasons that you outlined in cash games. Tim Lincecum, on the other hand, I don't know if we really need to say it, but I mentioned Ricky Nolasco is the second worst against right-handed hitters in terms of splits of any pitcher going today. Number one on that list is Tim Lincecum with a WOBA over 400 against righties. So target away.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's one. I mean, Lincecum's he's doing us a service. I mean, of years of being a decent pitcher in the past. Now it's his time to just kind of let us stack against him.
Yep, it comes full circle like that, isn't it?
Diamondbacks and Dodgers next. Kenta Maeda versus Zach Godley. Dodgers minus 250 favorites. It's huge here. Maeda, strong cash game option for me. I still think that he's even worth a shot in GPPs. A top 3 pitcher for me tonight. And even though he's a little bit, more expensive, he's up there. I definitely think he's worth that price tag. And this Diamondbacks offense, I mean, strike out quite a bit against right-handed pitching, 23%. And really, I mean, they are kind of a little bit top heavy. I think outside of Goldschmidt and Lamb and Segura, Maeda should do pretty well.
Yeah, and he's a minus 240 money line favorite, so obviously a huge chance at a win there at home. He has pitched a lot better at home. We should note that. Pitcher-friendly Dodger Stadium there. So those things really, really kind of working in his favor. There is a bit of price discrepancy. I think he's over 10K on DraftKings, and then you can get Steven Matz for 8.5 over there. So that's kind of an easy pick to take Matz over Maeda. But then it's the exact opposite on FanDuel, where Matz is 9.7, Maeda is 9K. So you can kind of diversify that way, taking Matz on DraftKings, taking Maeda on FanDuel, and feel pretty good about both guys. Obviously, we need to address the elephant in the room where a couple weeks ago, Maeda went against this Diamondbacks lineup in Arizona, allowed 7 hits, 4 earned runs. Was it 4 or 5 earned runs? I don't have it written down.
5.
But he kind of got lit up there in Chase Field. But, I mean, that's more attributed to the park factor. There were a couple errors in that game that kept innings alive. Just really kind of was a bad start from the get-go. Maeda really didn't have it. And it's tougher for a finesse pitcher to kind of land your pitches in a hitter-friendly ballpark like that and not get exposed. So that's kind of the difficulties Maeda ran into. I'm expecting a lot better performance at home tonight, where he's pitched a lot better this season. So I feel really confident in him in all formats.
Yeah, I definitely do too. And this is the 4th time that Maeda will face Arizona, and as you mentioned, that last start was his worst start in Arizona. I mean, he was fine on the road there in June. Had a great start back in April against them. Yeah, I'm with you, and I agree that FanDuel he's much more playable given that there is a decent price tag to him. And you look on DraftKings. I mean, Quintana's just 400 more. So DK, it fits in between a couple of other options, but FanDuel, I definitely like him a lot.
Yep.
As far as Godley goes, I'm not really looking to target him. I know he's cheap, but I think you can kind of fade against this Dodgers offense that slowly coming around.
Yeah, I'll take a couple hitters against him. Howie Kendrick, maybe Yasmani Grandal at catcher. A little bit of Justin Turner if you could find him for the right price. Those are the names that really come to mind. Obviously, Corey Seager mixed him in there as well. I think a Dodgers staff might be a little bit sneaky tonight, and they've actually been really good at home, so I don't really mind it.
Yeah, definitely. Giants Nationals next, Jeff Samardzija versus Max Scherzer, and we can finally talk about Max Scherzer. I mean, very pricey. I mean, 13.6 on DraftKings, 11.6 on FanDuel. Obviously, he's a favorite. I mean, minus 147. It's not what you like for a guy priced that high. And this Giants offense, I mean, I know they've been kind of struggling of late, but they still don't strike out a ton. They always don't allow a ton of upside. And usually I don't worry about that with elite guys like Scherzer, but I think the Giants are kind of a different animal.
Right, and you have a lot of solid pitchers in the mid-range, as we've addressed this whole podcast. So I think spinning down from Scherzer, saving an extra, 2,000, maybe even 3,000 if you're looking at certain guys, is certainly the way to go. And then just kind of take the savings and probably put it in some Red Sox hitters. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, no bias here.
It's the right play tonight. Hey, it's not biased if it's the right play and you're giving honest advice, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's Lincecum. I mean, how can you not like Red Sox against him?
Right. Yeah, on the other side, Jeff Samardzija I mean, he gives up a lot of production to left-handed hitters, and we've seen that over his past 2 starts. He's been kind of disappointing. This is a really good Washington offense, and they kind of got to Johnny Cueto last night. I think they can do the same to Jeff Samardzija, so definitely not worth the price point. Pitching at home as a pretty substantial underdog here. I just don't find a way where you can roster him with confidence.
No, I don't think so either. And I really think the addition of Trey Turner at the top of that lineup has made this Nationals offense a lot better, just given his speed and ability to kind of get in play. And as you mentioned, I mean, having Harper and Murphy right there after him is just something that should be trouble for Samardzija. And the price tag is definitely not worth that type of risk.
Right. I actually kind of like Harper and Murphy as some sneaky tournament picks if you can get them at the right price point.
Yeah, I definitely do too. I think FanDuel, they're definitely more appealing, given that they're pretty cheap there. Last game of the night here, you got the Reds and Padres. Brandon Finnegan versus Edwin Jackson. And for me, I don't mind Brandon Finnegan as a GPP guy. And I think there's just a couple of things why, and that's because Solarte is out of the lineup. That's because Melvin Upton's not there anymore. Other than that, I mean, you worry about Myers and Kemp, but after that, it's, a lot of lefty on lefty matchups. It's a lot of kind of average right-handers like Derek Norris, who used to hit lefties well, but not so much this season.
Right. That's kind of a good lesson on how to approach pitching and just daily fantasy baseball overall in the second half of the season, because the trade deadline just came. Obviously, there's a lot of action there, a lot of players moving, a lot of absences in the lineup. Like you mentioned, Melvin Upton is a big loss there for the San Diego offense. And that's just going to happen more and more as you get some prospects called up, giving them some time for some lame duck teams as we move into the last few months of the season. So definitely pay attention to who's in, who's out of the lineup, kind of, keep that in the top of your mind and not necessarily reading into the numbers on how they've performed throughout the whole season, because the lineups have changed so much. San Diego, they have been hot over the past month, and they've actually done pretty good at home, despite that being a pitcher-friendly park. But as you mentioned, those holes in the lineup, it does open up a little bit of production, a little bit of upside for a cheap play like Brandon Finnegan, who does have some decent strikeout rates. So, I mean, you're just kind of weighing those two things. Obviously, it would be tournament only. You like that he's helped by that pitcher-friendly ballpark there in San Diego, especially him being a lefty and that ballpark being really tough for right-handed power. Matt Kemp, Myers, a little bit of Derek Norris. That's what he has to work around tonight. But I don't really mind him as a cheap SB2 in tournaments if you can get all the hitters that you really want stacked around it.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's where I'm looking to use him, is that DraftKings SP2 spot. And on the other side, I mean, I'm expecting the Reds to kind of put up some run support against Jackson. This Reds offense has come around.
You're not expecting a no-hit bid into the 7th inning like 2 games ago against
I'm definitely not. I mean, that was definitely frustrating. I mean, when you look and kind of stack Giants against them. But tonight, I mean, Reds offense, I mean, since the break, I mean, Votto's really heated up. I like the Billy Hamilton move up to the top of the lineup. He's hitting over 300 since the break. And then obviously you got Bruce and Duvall. I mean, there's just a ton of power. So Jackson, I mean, kind of a stay away. I think if I'm using anyone, it's Finnegan from this one.
Right. And something I've mentioned several times in this podcast, but I think it bears repeating, that Petco Park is really tough on right-handed power, but actually fairly neutral to left-handed power. So guys like Bruce, guys like Votto in that lineup, I mean, I really wouldn't hesitate just based off of sheer park factor. Obviously, you're not going to hesitate on Votto because there's just so many ways he can get on base and do damage, regardless of the park that he's playing in. So definitely keep that in the back of your mind.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we just saw the Reds put up a fair amount of runs, I mean, in AT&T Park, I mean, outside the Bumgarner game. But we saw that, Bruce, it doesn't matter what park he's in, he's going to crush baseballs.
Right.
So that's going to wrap things up here with the pitcher nail down. Be sure to check out DailyFantasyCafe.com for all great tools and content.